Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everybody. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Experts. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grant writing courses. I have over 30 years of experience at NIH as a grantee, intramural researcher, staff writer, and now a full-time NIH grant writer. I've helped clients land nearly $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions today. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So for those of you who are new with us, a reminder that you're in listen-only mode. There is a question box where you can type your questions, and there is a chat box where you can put comments. What you should be viewing in the library right now, my suggestion is that if you're targeting a February or March submission, you probably want to be watching Master the R Series Part 1, the preparation section, and be doing some of those exercises in there, looking at the reporter website to vet your project idea, looking for study sections using the CSR ART tool, reaching out to the program officer to talk about fit to their funding priorities and mission, optimizing your selection of funding opportunity announcement, and really vetting your specific aims page to make sure that before you write anything, you really have a handle on the best project idea and you know exactly who you're writing to in terms of institute and study section. So in terms of updates at NIH, I want to let you know that a notice was just issued saying that they would extend their policy to allow preliminary data as post-submission material. So for those who don't know what that means, post-submission material is a category of information that you can supply to NIH to update your application package, and you're allowed to do that anytime from upload until 30 days before the study section meets. It's limited to a single page and you can only upload once, and there are very specific types of information that are allowed as post-submission material. In the past, people have typically used that mechanism to update on publication information, but during the pandemic, NIH has allowed people to use that mechanism to update their application in terms of preliminary data. So we know that they are going to be allowing that again this year. So just a disclaimer for anybody who is watching a recording of this, things change very quickly at NIH. So make sure you look at the date of this video and recognize that if you're looking at this sometime in the future, that things may have changed. So for up-to-date information, I would encourage you to check the NIH website. That's always your best bet, or to subscribe to my newsletter or watch my courses, which are updated very regularly. Okay, so we're going to have a tutorial today, a very short tutorial, and I'm going to talk about 3 things that are mission critical to subscribe to at NIH. I think NIH puts out a morass of information in terms of newsletters and notices and press releases and blog posts and dozens upon dozens upon dozens of these things. So rather than ask you to subscribe to all of them, which would make little sense for people who have a full-time job already, I subscribe to all of them, but this is my full-time job. I vet these things and make sure that I know what are the mission critical things that you really should subscribe to. So I'm going to review what I think are the 3 most important things to subscribe to. So, and I'm wondering if I actually attempted to put the URLs in the chat, and I'm wondering if you guys are able to see that. Let me see if I can reload those just in case. Nope, that's not what I want to do. Let's try that again. All right, this should work. Okay, is everybody able to see the 3 URLs in the chat box? hopefully you'll be able to see those. And if you have any problems with those, Jamie, who's on this call, will assist with posting those. Okay, so let's take a look at what those three are. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen. So the very first thing that I'm going to recommend that you subscribe to is the weekly table of contents at NIH. So this is just a view of it from my inbox. This is from last Friday. It shows up at 3 p.m. Eastern time sharp. I always know that it's 3 o'clock when that thing hits my inbox. And that, I'm sure that feels a little spammy, the fact that it comes once a week, but mostly you'll be able to scan through this and what's in there isn't going to be relevant to you. But when it's relevant, it's really relevant. So for example, on Friday, this is where I learned about the extension of that policy, where you can submit preliminary data as post-submission material. There's also information about NIH functioning under a continuing resolution. So you can open this up and see what does that mean? It just means that NIH has not received its final budget number yet. And why that's relevant to you is that sometimes there's a delay in the notice of award for people who are getting funding decisions right now, because typically when there isn't a new budget, NIH institutes will operate at 80% of the previous year's budget just to be on the safe side until they get firm budget numbers. So you can kind of go through here and quickly figure out, there's information about the Forms H application that's coming up for deadlines on January 25th and beyond. There are also general notices here. So things that are being terminated, policies, et cetera. Notices of changes to funding opportunity announcements, the list of NOCs, notices of special interest, which are just kind of broad umbrella topics under which might be listed multiple FOAs and participated in by multiple institutes. And then the release of new funding opportunity announcements. So you can quickly scroll through here, and the overwhelming majority of this information isn't going to be relevant to you, but when it is, it's really relevant. And this is kind of the first line of where it's announced. So things like, again, new form sets or changes to scoring criteria. This is usually the first place where I learn about this stuff because it comes out so frequently. So where do you subscribe to that? Here, which is in the chat box, I hope. And it's not, you have to kind of look, you have to actually send them an email to listserv@list.nih.gov. There isn't a window to put your email address, which is a little annoying actually, but that's how you do it. So that's the first thing that I recommend. The second one that I recommend that you subscribe to is the Extramural Nexus open mic blog. So Mike Lauer, this dude right here, is the head of extramural research. So NIH has an intramural division, which is a small part of their budget. I think it's less than 10% of their budget is people who are on campus doing research, their intramural program. The vast majority of their budget goes out as extramural grants. So the extramural grant program, or the extramural division of NIH, is gigantic. So Mike Lauer is the person who oversees that, and he writes a really nice blog post. This comes out less frequently than the table of contents. It's certainly not weekly. I would say it's once every couple of weeks this comes out, and you can pick and choose your topics. So this is one that this is dated November. This was a 6-part series. We're on part 6 of that. You can see that they kind of analyze funding metrics, and look at a variety of other topics. So, sometimes they have to do with like form sets. Sometimes they have to do with like pre-award support administrative topics. Sometimes they're analyzing metrics like this one, I think there was one that came out recently that talked about people who have more than one or 3 or 4 RPGs, how do they break down by gender, race, ethnicity, things like that? I'm sure you can guess how that breaks down. So anyway, and notices of like this is a workshop that I plan to attend on human subjects. It's December 6th through 7th. So it's all kinds of news that's relevant to NIH grantees. So I love that. I think you should subscribe to that, and you do that on this page. And again, this URL should be in the chat box right now. And then the last thing that I recommend is if you go over to the Center for Scientific Review website, they have a blog post as well. But I just want to pause for a second because some people don't know what the Center for Scientific Review is. So the majority of grant applications that come to NIH are not reviewed at NIH. The review function was separated out a number of years ago. And so most of them, I think it's something like 70% are reviewed at the Center for Scientific Review. So some are still reviewed in the Institute. So those tend to be like the F-series, the center grant applications, some of the larger U's like the multi-project U's, U54s are sometimes done there. Sometimes K's are reviewed at the Institute in SEPs that are set up by program officers, special emphasis panels set up by the program officers. But the vast majority go to the Center for Scientific Review. They're the ones who oversee the standing study sections. So when you're using that CSR ART tool, those are the standing study sections that are overseen by the Center for Scientific Review. So as you can imagine, it's really important to keep abreast of information here. So I would recommend that you subscribe to the Review Matters blog. So before we click over there, I just want to point out there's all kinds of information here for you. It's not super detailed. So like planning and writing your application, you can see submission pitfalls. You know, like it's pretty scant, but it's on target. So that's another way to educate yourself is to go through some of those educational tools. But if you come over to the Review Matters blog, that will lead you to my slow connection. And here it is. So this comes out, let's see, it looks like, I mean, this was October and September, and then not again since February. So it looks like they take some breaks here. So a couple of times a year. Those of you who remember the old blog, it used to come out 3 times a year. So anyway, I think this can be really good too. The hot news now is that they have their new strategic plan. We've been blogging about that and putting notices about that on our social media. So if people want a synopsis of the CSR strategic plan, you can head over to our LinkedIn page, our Facebook page, or our Twitter account, all of which have synopses of some of these news items. So yeah. Oh, and also CSR has a Twitter feed. I'm not a big Twitter person, but I know lots of people really like to keep up with news that way, even among their colleagues. So if that's your jam, go ahead and subscribe to the CSR Twitter feed. I subscribe to it. I don't look at it very much. I tend to read the blog post more. I like the more in-depth stuff. So, but this is obviously more frequent. So anyway, I am going to stop share now. And I am happy to start taking questions if people want to start typing questions in the Q&A box. But meanwhile, the other thing I'm going to do is pull up some questions that I was asked during the week. So this week, for some reason, I had a lot of questions about multi-site studies and foreign collaborators. So I thought I would speak about that a little bit. And I have also written some blog posts about that will be coming out on our blog. So, so first I wanted to address the question of whether or not it's a good idea to have a multi-site study. Like, what are the advantages of that and what are the disadvantages of that, and how do reviewers look at it? So a second site is expensive. It takes time and money to set those up. So you damn well better have a good reason for doing it, or reviewers are not going to be happy about it. So some of the, and I will also say that if you are a first-time R01 applicant, it's probably not your best idea to do a multi-site study, because it takes a certain level of experience to oversee a multi-site study. You have to really have a certain level of experience and expertise to coordinate effort across multiple sites. Otherwise, they all wind up operating like their own little fiefdoms instead of coming together as a unified whole. So it takes an experienced PI to be able to do that and to coordinate the communication and the effort and to make sure that you're on top of that. So as a first-time R01 applicant, you probably don't want to do that. You probably want to do a single site until you're more experienced. So what are some reasons to add a site? Well, one reason is that you have an existing collaboration, a strong existing collaboration with somebody at that site, in which case you would be able to demonstrate that with publications. And if you have lots of publications with somebody at another site, you've kind of already demonstrated that you can do this. You know, really, that's what NIH is interested in. Can you successfully collaborate and crank out publications with somebody who's not on your campus? So that's one of the main reasons that people use. If you're doing human subjects research, sometimes people will add a site to diversify the pool of people who are recruited. So for example, maybe you're at a location, maybe you're at a rural location, and the people you can recruit are very homogeneous. They all represent kind of the same race and ethnicity. You don't have diversity in terms of your socioeconomic status. So maybe you want to partner with an urban setting where they can increase the diversity of the people who are recruited. So sometimes people do it to increase the number of people who are recruited as well. So for example, I worked with an NCORP recipient who in their application, they were studying rare childhood cancers, and they actually collaborated with dozens of sites because that's what they needed to do to get their numbers high enough to power their studies, because it was rare childhood cancers. But that PI had tons of experience. So the reviewers bought it. So the other thing you might do is if the new site represents a different kind of setting. So for example, if you're proposing some kind of, let's say you're in a clinical environment and you're proposing some sort of new lab test, or you're proposing the creation of a biorepository and how that information is going to be collected and sent to the central biorepository, or a new clinical workflow, and you want to show that the system you're proposing would work in all different types of sites, you might want to collaborate with a site that's very different than your own. So like if you're at an academic urban medical center, you might want to collaborate with like a rural clinic to show that they also can use these systems and make this process work. So it's scalable and generalizable to the biggest audience possible. So how do you reassure reviewers that you can actually pull off multiple sites? So the most obvious thing is to limit the number of sites. So the fewer sites you have, the better. So only set up an additional site if you absolutely have to do it to, power your studies, or because you have a crucial key personnel at that place. But don't just add sites for the sake of itself, because the more sites, the more skeptical reviewers are going to be that you can pull off that coordination. As I said before, the PI has to have a demonstrated track record in leading a multi-site study. Whenever possible, try to include sites that are nearby. So for example, it's a lot harder to collaborate from one coast to another. So, like if your primary site is in New York City and you're collaborating with a site on the West Coast, you've got a 3-hour time difference, and it's really hard to meet in person. Whereas like if you're coordinating with several sites that are within driving distance of your primary site, that's an easier communication plan. Like you can actually have on in-person meetings fairly easily and inexpensively. You're not flying people all over the place. And the other thing is to write a careful communication plan. What is your communication plan going to be? So, how are you going to communicate on a daily basis, on a week? Do you need to communicate on a daily basis? At the very least, you should probably be communicating on a weekly basis. And then you probably want full team meetings, maybe virtually once a month and maybe in person 1 or 2 times a year. So you need to say how that's going to work. And if it's a big, complicated clinical project where you've got, people who are involved with recruitment at multiple sites, those folks probably want to communicate every day so that they're troubleshooting recruitment issues and that kind of thing. So piggybacking off of this, I want to address this issue of a foreign site. So why is a foreign site an issue for NIH? Well, pretty simply because NIH is paid for out of US taxpayer dollars. And so Congress feels really, and therefore NIH feels very strongly that that money should be spent in the US, not just on the US labs, but on the businesses that support them. So the suppliers of lab equipment, even like the places where the lab workers go and have lunch, Congress really strongly prefers that that money is spent in the US and that it's stimulating the economy within the US. So how do you propose a foreign collaborator and why would you want to do that? Well, there are a number of reasons why you might want to do that. The most obvious is that you may have a project that's entirely based somewhere else. So maybe you are studying infectious disease in some population in the Caribbean or in Africa. Obviously, you've got to have a foreign site there because the whole project is built on that. So in that instance, you're probably going to start your journey at the Fogarty Center, which specializes in projects like that and foreign projects. But don't discount other institutes and centers as well. So in my infectious disease example, you would probably reach out to NIAID as well and see who is interested in collaborating. So that's the most obvious time when you would have a foreign collaborator. The next most likely scenario, and the one that is usually a slam dunk, is if you have a project that's primarily based in the US, but there is a collaborator who has unique expertise that cannot be duplicated in anybody else, and that person happens to be in another country. So if you can truly make the case that that person's expertise is unique and cannot be duplicated, almost always reviewers will say, okay, we agree that you should be able to work with that person, but you got to work really hard to make sure that reviewers are convinced that you can't duplicate that person's expertise within the US. And again, you might have foreign sites. So for example, you might want to increase the diversity of a clinical population. So like if you were doing a study where you're generating a database of genetic variants that are associated with Alzheimer's disease, rather than basing that in one country, you might want collaborators in different countries so that you're getting more variants into your database. So it's a more robust database that can be used by people around the world. So that would be a justification as well. But in that instance, often NIH will expect that the foreign sites will kick in money toward it, that it's not NIH that is solely funding that. So how do you reassure reviewers if you're going to do this? Again, your big thing is going to be to write a really clear communication plan. That is crucially important. Particularly if you have a huge time difference and big geographic distance, it really helps to already have successful publications with that foreign site. So anyway, do people have questions about this? This seemed to be a big topic that came up this week. And if we don't have other questions from the attendees, the other thing that I just wanted to kind of quickly cover, given that it is November 2nd and we are hot on the heels of the resubmission deadline. So the A1 deadline is November 5th, and then we come very quickly up on the resubmission deadline for the Ks on the 12th, and the RO21s and the RO3s I think are on the 16th. You are no longer allowed to mark changes to your revision application. So it used to be back in the day, back in the olden days when I was writing grant applications, you used to have to mark your revisions in your revision application. People did it in a variety of ways. Sometimes they just put a simple bar in the margin to indicate where there was new text, or sometimes they put a box around it. Sometimes they used shading. Back in the day, you weren't allowed to use colored fonts, so that wasn't an option. But in 2016, NIH said, you don't have to do that anymore. You can do it if you want, but you don't have to. That's changed again, and now you are no longer allowed to mark the revisions. So there is actually a notice that NIH put out that says, don't do it. And the quote here that I have is, do not mark up changes within application attachments, e.g. do not highlight, color, bold, or italicize changes in the research strategy. So this is vexing for some people who really do want to direct reviewers to very specific things that have been changed. And my suggestion to you is to use an outline for your research strategy, particularly in the approach. So by convention nowadays, you probably know this if you have attended any of my trainings, by convention, people typically label significance as A, innovation as B, and approach as C. And just so you know, there's nothing after C. There should be no D, E, F, et cetera. Everything else is a subheader of C. So if you build out your subheaders under C, you could have like C1 overview and C2 team, C3 preliminary data, and then list your studies under that, et cetera. So if you want to direct in your one-page introduction, you really specifically want to direct reviewers to a change in the application, you can just parenthetically say in the introduction page, see section C.3.2, and then they'll go look at a specific study in the preliminary data section that you added since then. So anyway, that was something else that I wanted to cover. And I had one other, let me just make sure there are no questions coming in. Y'all are quiet today. I think everybody's a little worn out from the grant season. So another question I got was, I thought you were only allowed one resubmission at NIH, but I hear colleagues speaking about submitting a project many times. How is that possible? And it is true that now NIH allows you your first submission, which is the A0, and a resubmission of that, which is the A1. And on that A1, reviewers would have access to the previous application, the reviewer comments, and you're allowed an additional page to argue persuasively for funding. And that page is the introduction to the revised application. Let's say you're not successful on either the A0 or the A1. Do you scrap your idea? No. Typically at NIH nowadays, what people do is they retool the idea and then submit it again as a new A0. So that has no connection whatsoever to any previous submission. So reviewers will not see the earlier submissions. They won't see reviewer comments, nor can you write an introduction to it. You just put it in as if it's like tabula rasa. Of course, if you're sending it to the same study section, some of those reviewers may remember the previous application. And, you know, a lot of reviewers say the same kinds of things. So it's still worth thinking about the summary statements you got on the original 2 submissions and trying to address some of those concerns that you thought were reasonable, so that this new set of reviewers don't give you the same feedback. So anyway, those are some of the questions I got this week. So we are out of time. So I thank everybody for attending. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.